Fresh figs today.
How much for the olives?
Finest pottery in all of Rome.
Roman history, power, betrayal, and the untold truths of an empire. Imagine for just a moment that you are standing in the shadow of the Colosseum, its massive stone arches towering above you, clouds roaring, the smell of dust and blood filling the air. But what if I told you that behind this spectacle of glory lay secrets, betrayals, and untold truths that would shake the very foundations of the greatest empire the world has ever known? Welcome to the journey of Rome, where power was everything. Betrayal was common, and the truth was often buried deep in the ruins. Stay with me till the end, because what you are about to hear will not only change how you see history, but will leave you questioning the very legends you thought you knew. And before we dive in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we have countless more hidden shadows of history waiting just for you. Now, let us step back over 2,000 years and walk through the streets of the eternal city. Rome was not built in a day, and it was not built by kindness. It was built on ambition, discipline, and above all, conquest. The story of Rome begins not with emperors or mighty legions, but with a myth: two brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants, suckled by a she-wolf, and destined to shape the destiny of a people. Their tale may be wrapped in legend, but like all myths, it carried a seed of truth. The struggle for power between brothers was something that would echo throughout Rome's history, and just as Romulus killed Remus to claim dominion, so too would Romans spill blood for the sake of control. From this myth was born a city, a people, and eventually an empire. But what made Rome truly different was not just its soldiers or its stone walls. It was the system of discipline and organization that allowed a small settlement by the Tiber River to grow into a machine of domination. First came the kings, a line of rulers said to have divine favor, but soon Rome's people tired of monarchy. They rebelled, casting off kings in favor of a republic, a new experiment in governance, one that would inspire nations even thousands of years later. In the Roman Republic, the Senate held power, a gathering of elites who claimed to speak for the people, yet power is never easily shared. And even in these early days, the seeds of betrayal were sown. Senators plotted, generals schemed, and alliances shifted like sand in the desert. At the heart of this republic was the struggle between the patricians, the wealthy elite, and the plebeians, the common folk. Though laws would be passed to balance the scales, inequality remained the lifeblood of Roman politics. And as centuries passed, ambition pushed men beyond the limits of tradition. Rome expanded through war, first against its neighbors in Italy, then across the Mediterranean, defeating Carthage in the Punic Wars, where Hannibal and his elephants stormed across the Alps in a bold but doomed attempt to break Roman. Well, Rome's victory against Carthage was not just a triumph of arms, it was the birth of an empire. But empires bring wealth, and wealth brings corruption. The republic groaned under the weight of its own success. Powerful generals like Marius Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar rose, commanding armies loyal to them rather than to Rome itself. Soon the republic would find that its greatest threat was not foreign enemies, but its own leaders. Betrayal became the language of politics, and daggers the punctuation marks of ambition. And here enters Julius Caesar, a man who embodied both the glory and the doom of Rome. His conquests in Gaul made him a hero to the people, but a danger to the Senate. He crossed the Rubicon River in open defiance of Roman law, declaring that no power could stop his rise. His words, Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, echoed through history. But behind his victories were whispers of tyranny. Rome loved Caesar, but Rome also feared him, and fear in politics is deadly. So on the Ides of March, daggers flashed beneath the theater of Pompey as even his closest allies plunged their blades into him. Betrayal was complete. The republic bled with Caesar, and in that wound the empire was born. For from the chaos stepped Augustus Caesar, Rome's first emperor, cloaked in the language of the republic, but wielding the power of a monarch. Augustus brought stability, peace, and prosperity. The Pax Romana, an age of order that lasted for centuries, but peace had a price. Beneath the marble and mosaics lay darkness, emperors who ruled with cruelty, madness, and suspicion, like Caligula, who named his horse Consul, or Nero, who played his lyre as Rome burned. Betrayal did not end with Caesar, it became a tradition. Plots, conspiracies, poisonings, and assassinations haunted the Palatine Hill, where emperors slept uneasy knowing that even their guards could turn against them. But Rome was not just emperors, it was its legions, disciplined soldiers who carried the eagle standard across Europe, Asia, and Africa. They built roads, cities, and aqueducts, spreading Roman law and culture, but also enforcing it with the sword. These legions feared little, but even they could not stop the slow rot of corruption. Emperors wasted fortunes on games and palaces. The Senate became a shadow of itself, and ambitious generals once again tested the strength of Rome's loyalty to itself. Betrayal returned in civil wars, tearing apart the empire from within. The story of Rome is not just one of glory, it is one of constant conflict between power and principle, between ambition and loyalty. And the untold truths are often the darkest, for Rome thrived on slavery. Millions of men, women, and children captured in war were forced to labor in fields, mines, and households. Their suffering, the silent foundation of Roman wealth. And though gladiators fought for glory in the arena, it was not freedom they gained, but fleeting moments of survival. Spartacus the slave, who led a rebellion, shook Rome to its core, but in the end, even he was crushed. His followers crucified along the roads as a warning. Betrayal once again, this time of hope itself. Yet Rome endured, it grew, it changed, and it adapted, because the true power of Rome was not its armies nor its emperors, but its ability to survive through reinvention. Each crisis birthed something new, and yet each reinvention carried with it new betrayals. From the crisis of the 3rd century, when the empire nearly collapsed under civil war, plague, and invasion, to the rise of Constantine, who embraced Christianity, transforming the empire's soul from pagan temples to Christian churches. Still, the betrayal of the old gods lingered. Their temples abandoned, their statues toppled, their priests forgotten. Power shifted, betrayal followed, and the truths of Rome were rewritten with every age. And yet through it all, one thing remained: Rome's story was never finished, because even when the Western Empire fell in 476, Rome lived on in the East, in Byzantium, carrying its laws, culture, and traditions for another 1,000 years. But that is a story for later. Now, as we stand in the ruins of the Eternal City, we see not just stones and arches, but whispers of power, betrayals, untold truths waiting for us to uncover. And if you think the story is finished, stay with me, because what comes next will change how you see Rome forever. To truly understand Rome's story, we must go deeper, not only into the battles and emperors, but into the very fabric of Roman society. Because while power shifted hands in the palaces of the Palatine Hill, life in the streets of Rome told another tale. The city itself was a marvel, the beating heart of an empire with a population of over 1 million people at its height, something unheard of in the ancient world. Aqueducts brought fresh water from distant mountains, feeding fountains and public baths, where Romans gathered not just to wash, but to socialize, conduct business, and even conspire. Betrayal did not only happen in marble halls, it brewed in the whispers of bathhouses, in the stalls of crowded markets, in the smoky taverns where gladiators, slaves, and merchants rubbed shoulders together. The Roman Forum bustled, senators walked in their white togas, priests made sacrifices at temples, generals returned in triumph, parading spoils of war and chained captives. Yet among the splendor, ordinary citizens struggled. The plebeians worked long hours, living in cramped, insulated apartments, often 6 or 7 stories high, poorly built, and prone to collapse. Fire was a constant threat. Disease spread easily. Life expectancy was short for many, while the elite dined on exotic delicacies from across the empire: peacock tongues, flamingo brains, oysters from Britannia. The poor survived on bread, porridge, and olives. Here, betrayal was not about daggers, but about survival. Politicians promised grain handouts to win votes, generals promised land to their soldiers, but rarely delivered. Betrayal became the currency of Roman politics, and the people learned quickly that loyalty was often a dangerous gamble. But if the streets revealed hardship, the arenas revealed another truth. The Colosseum, perhaps Rome's most famous monument, symbolized both the glory and the cruelty of Roman society. Tens of thousands would gather roaring as gladiators fought wild beasts or each other, their blood soaking the sand beneath their feet. Some gladiators became legends adored by the crowd, yet most were slaves, condemned criminals, or prisoners of war forced into combat for the amusement of the masses. And behind every cheer lay betrayal, freedom promised to a few, but denied to most. The story of Spartacus reveals this dark truth: a gladiator who rose against Rome, leading a slave rebellion that terrified the Republic for years. His army of runaways, farmers, and slaves defeated Roman legions again and again, shaking the foundations of power, but in the end betrayal crushed him, defeated by Crassus and Pompey, his men crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left to rot as a warning to anyone who would challenge Rome's rule. Rome thrived on spectacle, but spectacle hid suffering. The untold truth of Rome was that its empire was built not only by its citizens, but by millions who had no voice. Rome's roads were paved by slaves, its villas staffed by slaves, its wealth built on the backs of those who had been conquered and sold. This reality sat uneasily beside the image of Roman greatness, but it was essential to its survival. And yet Rome was not only about cruelty, it also offered rights, laws, and citizenship in ways that were revolutionary for its time. Roman law became a backbone of the empire's system that promised justice, though often betrayed by corruption. Still, its principles would inspire legal systems for centuries to come. The idea that even the powerful were bound by law, at least in theory, made Rome unique. Roads connected cities across continents, commerce flourished, Latin became the language of power, spreading culture, art, and literature. The works of Virgil, Ovid, Cicero, and Seneca echoing through time. But culture too was a battlefield of betrayal. Traditional Roman religion, with its gods Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and countless others, had long guided the empire. Temples dominated city skylines, rituals bound the people together. Yet with the rise of Christianity, the old order was betrayed. What had once been a persecuted faith grew under Constantine into the empire's heart. Temples to the old gods closed, statues toppled, sacrifices ceased. For many Romans this was unthinkable, a betrayal of tradition, of ancestors, of identity. But the shift was unstoppable, and in this shift Rome transformed into something new. The betrayal of the gods was also a rebirth of the empire's soul. Still, betrayal was not limited to faith. Emperors themselves were often undone by their families, siblings conspiring against each other, wives poisoning husbands, sons plotting against fathers. Dynasties were rarely secure. One need only look at the Julio-Claudian line: Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, each connected by blood, yet each haunted by betrayal. Augustus adopted Tiberius, but mistrusted him. Caligula murdered relatives too. Secure power. Claudius was poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who sought the throne for her son Nero, and Nero himself ended his reign abandoned by all, a lonely fugitive betrayed by those he once commanded. The story repeated again and again in Rome's history, proving that even the most powerful could never truly escape the knife of betrayal. The Praetorian Guard, those entrusted to protect emperors, often turned executioners, selling the throne to the highest bidder. Emperors rose and fell not by votes or laws, but by whispers in the barracks and the sudden flash of swords. Still, despite all of this, Rome endured, because Rome was not only emperors, it was an idea, it was discipline, it was resilience, it was the ability to bend without breaking. But time wore away at even Rome's strength. The economy faltered, debasement of coinage, inflation, corruption, governors enriching themselves while provinces starved. The legions demanded more pay. Loyalty grew thin, frontiers stretched too far, rebellions flared. Invasions pressed harder. Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Huns, all probing Rome's borders. The empire poured blood and treasure into defenses, but betrayal from within weakened it more than any foe. The crisis of the 3rd century revealed this truth. Dozens of emperors rose and fell, many reigning only months. Some assassinated, others captured by enemies. Civil war became constant, plague and famine spread. Yet from this darkness Rome reinvented itself again under Diocletian. Reforms split the empire east and west, creating new centers of power, but unity was betrayed. The east looked to Constantinople, the west to Rome, and Ravenna. No longer one empire, but two siblings, bound yet divided. And as with Romulus and Remus, the rivalry between brothers would one day prove fatal. Constantine's rise brought hope. His embrace of Christianity reshaped the empire's destiny, but even he was betrayed by time. His successors divided his empire among sons who turned on each other. Civil war returning again and again, weakening the very foundation of Rome. By the time barbarian tribes pressed harder, the empire was exhausted. Betrayals had drained its strength. When Alaric and the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, it shocked the world. The Eternal City violated for the first time in 800 years. Though the empire survived, the blow was psychological proof that Rome was not untouchable, and betrayal had left it vulnerable. The Vandals came later, sacking Rome again in 455, looting treasures, carrying away spoils on their ships, and finally, in 476, the curtain fell not with a grand battle, but with quiet betrayal. Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor deposed by Odoacer, his own forces abandoning him, the boy emperor faded into obscurity, and with him the Western Empire ended. But Rome's story did not end, because in the East Byzantium survived, thriving for centuries. Constantinople, glittering with mosaics, palaces, and churches holding Roman traditions long after the West collapsed. Justinian sought to reclaim the West, his general Belisarius reconquering Italy, North Africa, even parts of Spain, but betrayal within his own court weakened him. Plague ravaged the empire, the dream of a restored Rome faded, yet Byzantium endured another 1,000 years, a shadow of Rome, but still its heir, until 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, the final betrayal of Rome's legacy in the East. And yet, even then, Rome lived on. In another form, in the Catholic Church, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, claimed authority. As the spiritual heir to the empire, medieval kings called themselves Caesars, Kaisers, Tsars, inheritors of Rome's mantle. The idea of Rome betrayed again and again, yet reborn each time. This is the untold truth. Rome never truly died. Its empire dissolved, its emperors murdered, its cities sacked, but its spirit endured, shaping the world in ways even Caesar could never have imagined. And so when we speak of Rome, we are not only speaking of history, we are speaking of ourselves, our laws, our languages, our governments, our very sense of civilization, all carry Rome within them. Rome was power, Rome was betrayal, Rome was truth, and Rome was lies, but above all, Rome was eternal. Stay with me, because as we dive even deeper, you will see that the story of Rome is not finished. It is still being written in the world around us. To carry the story forward, we must not only speak of emperors and wars, but also of ideas, because Rome's greatest weapon was not just the sword, but the mind. Rome mastered conquest through force, but maintained empire through culture, law, and adaptation. The very idea of citizenship evolved from an exclusive privilege of Romans in the city to a right granted across the empire by the Edict of Caracalla in 212. Suddenly, millions of provincials were Romans, bound by law, entitled to protection, but also tied to taxes and obligations. Yet this expansion of citizenship carried betrayal within it, for while it united people, it also diluted the meaning of what it was to be Roman. The proud distinction of citizens became common, a title used to demand loyalty, but not always given willingly. Still, this legal universality was revolutionary. Rome created a world where diverse peoples could see themselves as part of something greater, even as they grumbled beneath the weight of taxes and conscription. Betrayal here was subtle promises of equality that masked the control of a distant elite. Roman law itself became one of the empire's most enduring legacies. Principles of contracts, property rights, and legal precedent shaped societies long after Rome's fall, but within the system, corruption thrived. Judges bribed senators, influenced decisions, governors ruling provinces as their personal estates, betraying the very laws they swore to uphold. Yet it is often in betrayal that transformation is born, and Rome's law survived because it was too useful to die. The same can be said of Rome's engineering. Aqueducts spanned valleys, bringing water to cities, roads cut through mountains, connecting empire faster than any before. Amphitheaters, baths, sewers, bridges, walls, monuments to power, but also tools of control. Yet these marvels, too, carried untold truths, for while emperors boasted of providing public works, many projects were built on slave labor or funded by crushing taxes. The people praised the grandeur, but suffered the cost. Betrayal hidden beneath stone and marble. Still, the empire dazzled outsiders who marveled at its order, its beauty, its strength. To those beyond, Rome seemed invincible, but to those within, it was clear betrayal was gnawing at its heart. One of the most fascinating betrayals came not from generals or emperors, but from religion. For centuries, Rome tolerated many faiths, incorporating gods of conquered peoples, blending traditions. But when Christianity rose, it was first met with suspicion, persecution, harsh punishments. Christians refusing to honor the old gods were seen as betrayers of Rome itself, blamed for disasters, scapegoated for unrest. Yet over time, their persistence and unity became undeniable. The betrayal flipped when Constantine embraced the faith, turning the empire's identity upside down. Temples, once sacred, abandoned. Christian churches rising where pagan shrines fell. The old order betrayed by a new vision of eternity. For some Romans, this was liberation. For Others a devastating loss of heritage, yet it was irreversible. Rome, the empire of Jupiter and Mars, became Rome, the empire of Christ. This transformation ensured Rome's spirit would live on in the church long after the empire itself faded. Betrayal once again, leading to survival. Another layer of betrayal can be seen in the provinces where loyalty to Rome was often a facade. Britain, for instance, was of far frontier legions. Stationed there built walls like Hadrian's to keep out tribes, but loyalty was thin. Rebellions erupted under leaders like Boudica, who nearly burned Roman rule to the ground. Her revolt, though crushed, revealed the fragility of imperial control. Gaul too simmered with unrest. Germania resisted Romanization, and in the east Parthians and Persians matched Rome blow for blow on battlefields. These frontiers became bleeding edges of empire. Soldiers, often stationed there for decades, betrayed by promises of land and rewards that rarely came. Generals at times turned their armies inward, marching on Rome instead of defending it. The empire's vastness betrayed itself, stretched beyond what any one system could sustain, yet Rome refused to fall easily. Adaptation was its true genius. When crisis struck, reforms followed. The army reorganized, the bureaucracy reshaped, the economy adjusted. Emperors like Diocletian froze prices, reformed coinage, instituted new tax systems, yet these measures often brought short-term stability at the cost of long-term trust. Peasants crushed under heavy taxes, abandoned land, fleeing to estates of wealthy landlords, creating a new class of serfs, foreshadowing the medieval system. Betrayal again, promises of protection turning into chains of dependency, and still the machine churned on. Rome's relationship with its army deserves special attention, for the legions were the backbone of power, loyal, disciplined, fierce, yet their loyalty was often to their general, not to the state. This dynamic birthed countless betrayals, soldiers declaring emperors in the field, assassinating leaders they deemed weak, selling their swords to the highest bidder. The Praetorian Guard, especially infamous for making and unmaking emperors, selling the throne itself to the richest contender. Loyalty had a price, and betrayal always offered more. This constant cycle weakened the empire, eroding trust and stability, yet it also ensured that only the most cunning, ruthless, or fortunate rose to the top. Emperors learned to fear their protectors more than their enemies. In this world, suspicion was survival. One might ask, how did Rome endure so long under such constant betrayal? The answer lies in resilience. The empire was not a fragile crystal, it was a flexible steel, bending under pressure, reforming, adapting, reinventing. When cities burned, they were rebuilt. When emperors fell, another rose. When faiths clashed, one triumphed over the other, absorbing what came before. Rome's genius was not invulnerability, but transformation. Yet every transformation carried loss, every adaptation carried betrayal of what came before. By the time we reach the final centuries, the empire of Augustus, the marble city of gods and generals, was gone, replaced by a Christian empire divided in two, battered by invasions and weighed down by centuries of corruption. The West stumbled toward collapse, its emperors little more than puppets of generals and warlords. Betrayals from within far deadlier than barbarians from without, and yet even in decline, brilliance shone. Roman art, literature, and philosophy influenced generations. Roman law persisted, Roman architecture inspired kingdoms, Roman roads remained used for centuries. Betrayal may have ended the empire, but it did not end its legacy. In the East, Byzantium carried the torch, its capital Constantinople shining as the new Rome, with walls, impregnable commerce, thriving culture, flourishing for 1,000 years more. The Byzantines saw themselves as Romans, not Greeks, heirs to Caesar and Augustus. They preserved Roman law, Roman administration, even as they transformed language and faith. But here too betrayal thrived, generals rising against emperors, religious schisms dividing people, betrayals by allies leading to sieges and invasions, until finally in 1453 the city fell to the Ottomans, its walls breached by cannon fire. The last emperor, Constantine XI, falling sword in hand. The final chapter of Rome closed with betrayal, yet even then Rome refused to die, for the Ottomans styled themselves Caesars in their own right, and European kings continued to claim the legacy. The very idea of empire shaped by Rome lived on in Holy Roman emperors, Russian Tsars, German Kaisers, each betraying the original Rome by claiming its mantle. yet also keeping its flame alive, and so the untold truth becomes clear. Rome was never a single story. It was a cycle of power, betrayal, reinvention, survival, collapse, and rebirth, an eternal idea dressed in different forms. Rome's history is our history because we live in the shadow of its betrayals and triumphs. Our cities, our languages, our laws, our governments all carry traces of its hand. When you look at the ruins of the Colosseum or the crumbling aqueducts, you are not only seeing the past, you are seeing yourself, and this is why the story of Rome grips us still. It is a mirror of human ambition, cruelty, brilliance, and weakness, power pursued, betrayed, and lost again and again. And as you continue watching, remember this: Rome's fall was not an end, but a transformation into the world we know today. And the greatest betrayal of all is thinking that Rome is gone, when in truth Rome is still here. As the Roman Empire staggered into its final centuries, the very foundations that had made it great now seemed to weigh it down. The Senate had long since lost its power. The emperors were either tyrants or puppets, and the army, once a disciplined machine, was now divided, loyal more to individual generals than to Rome itself. The frontiers were collapsing as waves of barbarian tribes pressed harder each year, desperate for land, food, and wealth. And within the city walls, the once proud monuments of marble were decaying, their stones stolen to build new homes by those who no longer believed in the eternity of Rome. Yet Rome's spirit refused to vanish easily. Christianity had transformed the empire, reshaping its values and institutions. Constantine's vision of a Christian Rome gave birth to the Byzantine Empire in the Eastern realm that would carry Roman traditions for another 1,000 years. But in the West, the story was different. The sack of Rome in 410 by the Visigoths was a wound so deep that many believed the world was ending, yet Rome survived even this humiliation. Like a wounded giant, it struggled onward until 476, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was quietly deposed by the barbarian chieftain Odoacer. The Western Roman Empire had fallen not with a mighty clash, but with a quiet sigh. The eternal city now belonged to history. But here lies the true, untold truth of Rome. Rome never truly died. Its laws, its language, its culture, its vision of empire lived on in Europe and far beyond. The Latin tongue became the root of countless languages. Roman law shaped justice for centuries. Roman roads and aqueducts still stand in silent testimony to their engineering genius. And the dream of a united empire inspired kingdoms, popes, and emperors long after the city itself had fallen from grace. Every empire that came after borrowed from Rome, from Charlemagne to Napoleon to the United States. The Roman spirit continues to echo through history, and even today, when we walk through the ruins of the Colosseum or gaze at the Roman Forum, we feel at the pulse of a civilization that once ruled the known world and changed it forever. Rome was power, but also betrayal. Rome was glory, but also cruelty. Rome was innovation, but also destruction. Rome was humanity at its most ambitious and at its most flawed. And that is why 2,000 years later, we are still telling its story. Rome is not just history. Rome is a mirror of ourselves, reminding us of what we can achieve and how easily it can slip away. If you have stayed with me through the rise, the betrayals, the triumphs, and the fall of this eternal empire, then you have walked in the footsteps of emperors, gladiators, slaves, and senators, and you now carry the untold truths of Rome within you. And before you go, remember to like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to the channel, because here in the shadows of history, we bring to light the stories the world has tried to forget. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.